Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back. I'm Wayne Tuttle, once again your host. This is Chasing Legends. Before we get any further, please hit subscribe, hit the notifications bell, go to our About section, check out our t-shirts. Let's see, Dutch Hunter Rendezvous, Legend of Superstition Mountains, long sleeve, short sleeve, gray, black. Additionally, coffee mugs should be coming up there, so you get those for the Dutch Hunter Rendezvous and the Legend Superstition Mountains. Leave a comment if you want to leave a comment, all right? So we're rolling along here, and this was a couple different things I was going to talk about, and a couple things were requested. But this was something kind of, again, I'll be in the week, and I'll be kind of thinking about a couple different things, and like, okay, how would I approach this? And this one came up, and I was thinking kind of end of the road. Because at a certain point for everyone in Dutch hunting, you're going to come to the end of the road. For some people, the end of the road is something more definitive. It's just suddenly they're gone. They pass away, and they still have an expectation or still think they're going to continue this journey, and the journey just ends. Sometimes the road ends before they even believe it does, because they're just not able to continue that journey. And in some cases, it's absolutely by their own design, it ends. And it's someone, and this person tonight is someone that I've talked about quite a bit, Rhinehart Petrasch. Obviously, such an important figure in the story of the Lost Dutchman Mine. I think probably his importance is greater than any other person other than Jacob Waltz. Yet he's minimized constantly. And I think it's important to look at that because he probably, other than Julia Thomas, had the most time with Waltz the last year and a half of his life. We know they were close. We know they spoke. He was part of the original Dutch hunting crew that Jacob Waltz was going to take up into the mountains. He had an acquaintance with Waltz. They were both from Germany. They both spoke German. I think he probably looked to Waltz as someone generationally more like a father, an uncle figure like that. You have to remember, Reinhardt had come to Phoenix with his mother, his brother, and sister. Everyone leaves. He's there by himself. Waltz was probably almost like the closest thing he had a relative at that time. And we have to remember, Julia sent Reinhardt out to check on Waltz. And he went, and then he was part of that effort that was able to bring Waltz back to town. Remember, he did errands for both Julia and Waltz. He's the one that, according to Julia, built Waltz's coffin. He allowed, or however you want to perceive it, for Waltz to be buried next to his brother George in the Petrasch family plot. So there's a closeness there I think everyone always kind of forgets about. When Waltz died, you don't get much from Julia or Reinhardt. I think it was emotional for them. I think it was a friend. It was someone they were close to. And I think in the case with Holmes and other people, it was easy to tell a deathbed story or something about Waltz and kind of like go after the character of these other peoples. Reinhardt's a drunk. Julia was like some voodoo woman at the time. And while Julia was that voodoo woman, it was more of an apocalyptic Christian type thing. Later, it's that thing going after the character of the people. I always found that kind of a bit odd and unusual. One thing in the Holmes manuscript from Brownie Holmes that I found very odd was he really steered away from Albert Schaefer. But after Waltz's death, not only Albert was married to Julia, but Albert was actually pretty close and actually spent a good amount of time with Herman and Reinhardt. So you have to kind of look at it as there was the core group was those individuals, Gottfried Petrasch and Julia. Reinhardt, again, there was always the thing, Reinhardt and Herman, there was this huge falling out. But Reinhardt had a lot of business, a lot of things he did with Herman for the rest of his life. In fact, The only person that I know Reinhardt filed any mining claims with was Herman. If you look at a number of different voting registers and stuff like that, you'll find that Herman and Reinhardt were generally in the same vicinity for quite a number of years, whether it was Verde Valley, Black Canyon City, different places, Gila County, Yavapai County, Maricopa County. We got a storm brewing in, so we might get a little noise behind me here, the wind rustling. Maybe watch this dark at night, huh? Nights with Wayne Tuttle. But anyhow, getting back to the subject matter. So Reinhardt's kind of in the mix of this always constantly. And he and Herman were close enough that when Reinhardt went for his pension and found out he was not a naturalized citizen through his father, Reinhardt made sure that Herman was very well aware of this, and then Herman went in, and when they asked him, why are you in? And he said, well, I found out my naturalization isn't real. It's because my brother Reinhardt contacted me. So they were on really good terms, and we'll get more even to that. But Reinhardt's always kind of set to the side. Now, our resources for anything on Reinhardt outside of any documentation, and it can be difficult to find because people would not only misspell his name, but they would misspell his name to enter it into databases. So if you keep trying different variations on Petrasch, sometimes you'll find documents that you weren't aware were there. But Reinhardt lived a pretty long life. He didn't just leave Phoenix, end up in Globe. He was in quite a number of different places. He even returned to Phoenix. There was a period of time where he was back in Phoenix, living in the East Valley. And so he does the travels of his life, but we're talking kind of getting towards the end. And the only people that really spoke, other than Jim Bark, who spoke to Julia and Reinhardt initiated that conversation with Jim Bark, which is why we have some of that. And I know Barry Storm spoke to him, but Barry Storm lost all his notes, interview pieces, and all his material to do with Reinhardt. That was his documents were all destroyed, so we lost all that. Ralph Pabst interviewed him. I've never been able to get any of that source material, and I know a lot of Ralph Pabst material came from Herman after the fact. So while he had met Reinhardt, I think the majority of everything he got for when he did his published book, which is in the Library of Congress, that pretty much came out of, like, whatever he had, the material was very minimal with Reinhardt. Other than those three individuals, then you're almost drawing a blank. In Barry Storm, it's just some footnotes in the annotated version with the notes of authenticity, original Thunder God's Gold. So there's so little real information directly from Reinhardt. Jim Bark is pretty much your primary, and I would say 95-98% of what we know about Reinhardt comes from what Jim Bark wrote, which was written for more of a novelization of the story. So Reinhardt appears to not want to be in the mix of a lot of this. Well, Gottfried went out with a number of different groups and seemed to be very proactive. And Herman stayed in the area and worked with a number of people and liked to sit and tell stories. Reinhardt seemed to defer to anyone else. So we do get the feeling that people would go, and when they would find Reinhardt, Reinhardt would speak, and then Reinhardt would defer them and send them Herman's way. Even though Reinhardt would be the primary source, he probably was one of the most. And Julia's gone by, what, 1917? So Reinhardt becomes figuratively that resource over anyone. But I think he just didn't want to bother with it. One, he was searching for the mine off and on. One of those things, too, that as far as his, not just character, was there was a story of Reinhardt heard about someone who found a lot of chalcedony in some canyon. And the description, or whatever it had to do with, Reinhardt got very, very excited. So he wanted to go check this stuff out and all. Well, everyone forgets by 1895, 1896, Reinhardt's basic employment involves mining until he dies in the 40s. Well, you have to remember, he had to be somewhat knowledgeable in some way and picked up something over the years. And yet they all basically say, well, Reinhart Petrasch didn't know what he was doing. He got real excited about some chalcedony, and he was really all about that, and, you know, nobody could explain to him. Well, I would think maybe he knew something we didn't that Waltz had said, and he knew the difference between chalcedony, different types of quartz, and he understood what that meant. So that is always a problem. I think even we find Godfrey and Herman treated him like he didn't know what he was talking about. Now, one story I heard, I met an individual who claimed that he had known Rhinehart Petrasch, old Pete and Globe. But he didn't have much of a story. And it wasn't worth sitting down. Greg Davis said, let's do an interview on it. And I said, it's not that much there. Ran into the guy, and I had 1,000 questions. And the guy said, all I can really tell you is he was someone that he would talk. And the moment someone would step in or say, well, that's not what I heard, he would just stop. Just be, okay, well, that's fine. Don't want to listen to me then. And that seems to really fit with a lot of what I kind of run into, is that probably happened with Storm and Paps and other people. They got very little from him because he was like, you know what, go talk to Herman. Okay, Herman said that, you go talk to Herman. And that sounds very appropriate for what we kind of, how we kind of see him over time. Is I think he just was like, I can tell you this story. And no one ever sat back and said, tell us the story. Tell us what Waltz. Tell us some of the stories Waltz told you. Because nobody's interested in that. What did you know about Waltz's family? There was a couple that actually talked to Julia a bit, and she got on that line, and they let it kind of go. But the point is, so much information that would have helped us later isn't there because people weren't interested. They were interested in clues. What did Waltz tell you about his mine? What did he tell you about this? But there's a lot of things we could be triggered and we could understand by knowing Waltz better. And Reinhardt appeared to know him very, very well, better than probably, and it could be even said better than Julia. But he goes his life of searching for the Dutchman. It's very quiet, and everybody just kind of like spins beyond it. Dick Holmes comes up so much more. Brownie Holmes, Julia Thomas and what she knew and all and this and that. Even Godfrey and Herman, and everybody forgets that guy kind of central to all this probably is Reinhardt. So Reinhardt gets to his later years, and we're not quite sure what he's been doing. And he's been in Globe. He tries to retire, and I mentioned the fact that the naturalization papers and all. And there's a problem. There's people like Clay Wurst, that though Clay physically probably may never enter the mountains again at this time, he's still searching. He still has people or is listening or something. I have wonderful conversations because at the same time as I'm talking to him about the psychology of Dutch hunters, I'm learning about that psychology from him himself. And Reinhardt, we're just not quite sure where he was in step with everything. We have the story that Godfrey had Waltz's papers, a lot of things, and he burned them. Herman says he burned all that stuff. He got rid of everything. Everything we had, my dad had, and he burned them. And I always questioned that because I thought that would stuff, why would he burn it? What was the difference between having it and not having it? And I thought that was interesting. So Reinhardt one morning gets up, goes out, visits people around town, and kind of does a lot, kind of one of those days where you just kind of check in with everybody. Now at this point he's retired, he has a pension, but he's not making much. He's working as basically a security guard at the ruins in Globe. And he goes around, checks in, makes sure a lot of things are up to date, and it's kind of a curious set of circumstances. And people kind of take it as kind of a moody thing, but they're not quite sure to what to make of it. But he's like, hey, if something happens to me, and, you know, you contact my brother Herman in Superior and all this stuff. And it's like, he's having a bad day maybe, or who knows. Well, the next day, there's these three gentlemen. They're down at the Globe City Barns, which is kind of the city yard. And they're talking about the weather, World War II, a lot of things that are transpiring and occurring at the time. And Reinhardt comes walking through, and they look over, and one of them sees Reinhardt. And they said as he passed by, they just kind of like, good morning, and he kind of like, and went on. And the point they made was, yeah, we knew, it was curious because he's usually in a really good mood, which gives us some insight into him. But they said he was always pretty upbeat, good mood, always good morning kind of guy. And so they can return to their conversation. You figure maybe the guy's having a bad morning. And Reinhardt goes back to the barns. It's the city. He works for the city for security, and he has access to there and all, and they don't know what he's there for. And they're having the conversation. They hear a loud boom. And they're all startled, and they're like, somebody's shooting. Reinhardt went that way. They wanted to check and make sure he was okay. So they went back, and what they found in one of the barns is Reinhardt had been in a chair. He had taken his shoe off, taken his toes. He had pulled the trigger of a shotgun with the shotgun in his mouth. He'd tied a piece of cardboard with a note that he was committing suicide onto the trigger guard. So it's very, very planned out. He ties it to the trigger guard. They said he did not take a shotgun, rifle, anything back there with him. So they said he had to have it back there already. So this was planned. They said he brought it back in there. He did this. And they were pretty much, they saw what had happened. Once they were able to get a peek, they left. They gave their statements. The police did their thing. Immediately, the police go to Reinhardt's, his residence. They find he has a mattress, a bed, very few things, but he had taken a metal trash can, I guess, and he had burned everything he had. All his papers, photographs, everything he had personal, he burned all that stuff in a can. There was nothing, they could not make heads or tail of any of it. Which I believe, most likely, Waltz's naturalization papers, anything to do with the Dutchman, he might have held on to the years that was passed from his father. Because both he and his father were known as Old Pete, but I believe that's what happened to those things. Reinhardt probably just figured that was it. They found an identical note written on cardboard of sorts in the room explaining the same thing. The idea is, and there was a note, and the note basically said he had failing eyesight. And he didn't want to be basically under the conservatorship of others with no eyesight. His father, Gottfried, had been committed to what you call the pensioners' home, the old folks' home. We consider today retirement different, but we hear horror stories about places. The pioneers' home was kind of very much a horror story, and Gottfried ended up in the insane asylum. And things were not good then, and I think because of what happened to his father, Reinhardt probably, and this is just me thinking, but he probably realized what happened to his dad and without his eyesight and how reliant he would have to be on other people and the cruelties and what happened with his father and how his father had passed away. He did not want that. I'll take things into my own hands. I'll deal with these things my own way. It's very sad, but it's significantly the end of the road, because I've always felt if there was a door that was shutting on the early window of opportunity, that door was pushed shut firmly when Reinhardt died, because it was the last person that had been with Waltz and was significantly in that position. If you want to believe the Dick Holmes story, he was gone. Julia was long gone. And Reinhardt, just kind of stand alone, was probably the most important piece. And we still had nothing. We had nothing written from his own word. We have no knowledge of what, outside of what Jim Bark has. So Reinhardt has committed suicide. They rule it suicide. Herman comes down to the funeral. They obviously have a closed casket. But Herman comes down, pays for the funeral. What cash Reinhardt had and so forth, the expenses. Herman pays for everything, make sure there's a funeral. He's buried in the old Globe Cemetery. But Herman takes care of things for his brother. What few things Reinhardt has, Herman gets. One of those things was the shotgun, and he had that, and that was passed along, and to some extent still exists. But so yes, the shotgun that Reinhardt killed himself with, Herman did have that, and that did continue to carry on in today. Never heard any curse or anything attached to it, but it is interesting that that kind of survived all through those years. And I don't know whose that was before that, or here or there, this or that. But when Reinhardt dies, there's nothing mentioned that the Lost Dutchman, Jacob Waltz, anything. Old Pete, he was a guy just well known around town. He'd worked as a miner for many years. There was just nothing in depth. And it shows you, even then at that time, the difference in the next 5-10 years, because 5-10 years later, between Sim Zealy and his book, and then the interviews with Herman, and Herman's star rises just before his death, and the release of Ely's book, everything takes on such a different tone. Thunder God's Gold would come out and build upon that. But Reinhardt, just before that story, Thunder God's Gold, Lust for Gold, all that, that would have kind of maybe brought him a lot more attention and maybe something he didn't want, he's gone. And it is the end of the road, definitively, because I think at that point, whatever we could have known, we'll never know. There's no, I don't think, any resource. We can find out more where Reinhardt was, where he traveled, what he did. But as far as his knowledge based on the Lost Dutchman Mine, I've tracked so many things, and I told the story of how I got excited when there were some letters and stuff. I've tried to track things so much and found there's just absolutely nothing. If there was something, it was something no one really knew what it was about and tossed it out. We know the pioneer's interview in Phoenix and all that at this time is a fictional account written by someone that was writing about a fictional person doing a fictional interview with a real person. But we can't take any of that or any statement of that as any truth, because it was a fictional character who by name in life lived in a place called Freeport, Illinois, and were magically transformed and moved to Phoenix, Arizona to tell a story about meeting Rhinehart Petrasch. And great research will always unlock these things, but it is a shame. It is a shame, a great shame, because we have so little insight. Some of the insight we have to almost forget because it's fictional accounts. It's fictional pieces that people made up to try to fill in something. Reinhardt's gone. Everyone that associated with him, far as I can tell at this point of the ways I've tried to talk to people over the last 20, 30 years, I only met a couple of people that knew who I was talking about in Globe, and both of them are long gone. And that's important, because it becomes just a dead end. And they have nothing. They have 5 seconds they can say, oh yeah, you know, he was in town. Yeah, I remember that. That was a pretty tragic thing. No, I didn't know nothing about that. So you just kind of like the end of the road on that stance. And it's probably one of those reasons the Lost Dutchman's so mysterious. Because I don't think Reinhardt meant it. I think he felt he had information. People didn't want to listen to him. And he got tired of trying to tell people that information. And he never had the right person that walked in that wanted to hear that story full out. Just imagine today, one of us sitting down with him and letting him just for hours unleash everything he could remember and knew, and the stories he could tell. Bob Garman's uncle, and Bob Garman told some stories that Herman had told from when he was out with them. And it's just amazing the amount of knowledge, the little things we lost. Those early camps, what they did. They're out there for a month in the mountains. You know, there's 100 silly stories, and we have very little of that. And it's something we just lost. And when you lose that, that's the end of that road. That road's done. It's finished. And you get to it, and you can look out at the mountains and stand there, but there's nowhere else to go. There's not even anything in sight. And I'm happy we have the documentation, and once in a while there's something that trickles in that helps me add a piece or a bit of understanding of his movements in Arizona. But I still find it intriguing. There's the enigma that none of us really know the mind of Reinhardt Petrasch. So that's it for this week. A little bit of a bummer one. But it's an interesting story because you hear me reference to not only the Petrasch Thomas material, but Reinhardt Petrasch quite a bit. And that was always the thing for me, is like, we're kind of like keeping this guy to the side. I don't understand why, because he seems so important. But sometimes the most important piece is not speaking to anyone, and then everybody just decides, you know what, we're going to kind of shelve him a bit because we don't want him to be important. So we're going to make him a drunk. We're going to make him this. We're going to make him that. And the problem is there are fewer and fewer people to argue those points, so that becomes that persona. So he becomes this person that we have no real evidence of. But in the back of our minds, he's drunk, he's asleep, he's this, he's that. He's all these different things. He's not the guy that spent a year and a half with Jacob Waltz, taking care of him, helping him out, doing everything. He's not the man that rescued and saved the man's life, or built his coffin, or buried him, or took all this great care, or got offended of what people said about Waltz. He's not that guy. He's this completely other fictional character that people want to make. So I think that's always important to remember. Got a little foggy in my throat, and I think the rain's starting to come down. So it's a good time to end things. But wish you well. Hope everybody has a great and wonderful week. And just remember, get down, leave a comment. You know, we like to hear the comments, like to hear your suggestions, what we have and what we're going to do. We'll see you again this Friday, probably for live. But until the next time, always remember, I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.